I want to start with an apology. We pride ourselves here on our accuracy, but we realized very late in the day that our backdrop is no longer correct because it still features the East Wing of the White House. Let me show you where it used to be. So this right here, that was the East Wing. Now it's a hole. That's just a hole next to the White House. Over here, that's the West Wing. That's still standing as far as we know, although I'm not there right now to prove it. In the back here, you got that's the Empire State Building, and over there, that's LAX. And also, we got a cold front moving in from Ohio, so break out your sweaters. Anyway, we'll fix the picture to reflect the new reality once Congress restores our funding. The list I read at the top of the show, that's not even all of the norm-busting news from this week. Tonight, our overall subject is impunity. How does a president get to knock down the East Wing? Is that even legal? By what authority does he do the things he does? Here to provide us with some insights are our guests, Peter Baker, the chief White House correspondent at the New York Times. Susan Glasser is a staff writer at the New Yorker. David Ignatius is a foreign affairs columnist at the Washington Post. And Tolu Olorunipa is a staff writer at The Atlantic. Thank you for participating in my fantasy camp. I've always wanted to do the weather. And I have a laser pointer. I'm going to call on you with a laser pointer from now on. Washington Week. You
gotta love it.
Challenging times call for a different approach. Peter, let me start with you. I want you to listen to something that President Trump said a few years ago. Why don't you just listen to this?
If the radical Democrats take power, they will take a wrecking ball to our economy and to the future of our country.
Now we know where the wrecking ball was headed. So the White House is called the People's House. We send somebody there for 4 years to live in it rent-free, and then pass it on to the next person who we choose to send there. So I just don't, frankly, understand how a temporary occupant who pays no rent can just knock down a part of it without congressional approval, without anyone's approval.
Yeah.
Washington's
a historic city, and if you try to change your door or your front yard in a lot of different parts of the city, you would have to go through a whole big bureaucratic process that would take months and months and months. Not if you're president of the United States, it turns out. You just call a demolition company from Maryland, you get them down there and whack away without telling anybody or asking.
It wasn't a government agency that took down.
No.
Well, of course, we're in a shutdown anyway.
That's right, exactly. And he says he's paying for this with private funds. Now, look, the argument that he's making is that there needs to be a ballroom sufficient to presidential needs, and it's true the state dining room only seats about 140 people, and presidents in the last few years have been using the South Lawn, putting a big cathedral tent there because it isn't big enough. Fair enough, and there are a number of people who think that that's not a bad idea necessarily. But the way he went about this, the sort of unilateral way, I'm doing it by fiat way, the people's house is now suddenly my house, and I get to decide that we're getting rid of this structure. This part of the structure has been there since Theodore Roosevelt put it up in 1902. That really struck a lot of people, Republicans and Democrats, this week. And I think it really lent to the metaphor that you've played with here, which is a guy who's taking a wrecking ball to Washington writ large.
Right. Tolu, you're a former White House bureau chief. It's you know the building and the people who run the building. This has to be one of the most shocking things to happen to the physical structure, well, certainly that you can remember.
For sure. I spent a lot of time in the East Wing. There are a lot of memories that people have there from Republicans and Democrats who've worked at the White House who have spent time in that building, and seeing it defaced and deconstructed in a matter of 3 days was really shocking to the conscience of a lot of people, especially people who have worked there. But it's also for people who admire Washington, who admire the presidency, who admire the White House. It's a sign that this president is not doing things the way previous presidents did. He's doing it his own way, and he's doing it in a way that really thumbs his nose at the idea that, you know, checks and balances actually work, that I have to consult Congress or history or historians to do anything that I want to do. And he is acting with a lot of impunity. This is something that struck a nerve in ways that other things that he's done, from the tariffs to other policy things that maybe people couldn't really understand. But seeing the White House being torn down in a way that was never expected, in a way that he promised that he wouldn't do, I think that was a big shock to a lot of people.
Susan, stay on this theme of impunity. He didn't go to Congress. He didn't say, you know, I have this idea. He didn't send it through a historical preservation commission. He didn't do any of that. What does he know about checks and balances right now that we don't?
Well, I think Donald Trump heard the message loud and clear from the United States Supreme Court even before he returned to office in the summer of 2024, when the Supreme Court ruled essentially that the president has immunity for almost any act that could occur in the course of his presidency, since Congress, controlled by Republicans in both the House and the Senate, has proven to be essentially supine when it comes to any of the kind of sweeping acts of executive, overreach that we've seen so far. It's not really a reach for Donald Trump to conclude that he had the unilateral power to do whatever he wanted. At this point, he's the man saying, come and get me if you dare. And it strikes me that, when you give already the most powerful office in the world, the sense that there's literally no one who's going to say no to this person who has raged his entire life at the idea that there are rules and constraints and, people trying to stop him from doing what he wants. Right now, he's on a tear, in part because there's nobody who's going to stop him. He's constructed an administration with people around him who are there explicitly because they are yes men and in some cases yes women. And just to this point about, he still feels the need to mislead, right? He did say when he rolled this out originally this summer, oh no, there's not going to be damage to the existing structure. And then boom, he creates a new set of facts overnight on the ground. I would also point out that the new ballroom that's envisioned, while there could be a strong argument to say this, should be done, not only is there no process, but the design that Donald Trump has personally greenlit is for something like 90,000 square feet. It is going to overwhelm the White House
the main
itself.
main building of the White House is 55,000 square feet.
Correct. So it's going to overwhelm the White House itself. Again, approved by no entity aside from Donald Trump himself.
David, you've covered Washington for a little while. You ever see anything like this?
So this does feel different, and I've been trying to think, why does it feel so different? Peggy Noonan, who's a fairly conservative columnist, wrote on the Wall Street Journal this morning a very angry, emotional piece. Headline was, "A Republic, but can we keep it?" Ruminating on this. I think part of it is just this feeling that this is the people's house, and he's treating it like his own personal property. He's treating every part of the government like his own personal property. It's almost a compulsive desire to blow through limits, in every direction, involving the military, the CIA, justice, the campaign of retribution against his enemies. And I think it's begun to worry more and more people. This is such a symbolic moment with a steam shovel. If that photograph on the Washington Post, my beloved newspaper, hadn't appeared, we might not have known about this for a day or two. I mean, they were doing this stealthily, which is shocking.
Right. They didn't announce it. They tried to hide it.
Yep.
They knew there'd be a reaction. I don't think they knew quite the reaction that there would be. But what's really remarkable, too, is how anathema it is to the original design of the White House. Yeah. The original idea of the White House was to produce a relatively modest home for a president compared to the palaces of Europe. They didn't want a Versailles. George Washington and the group that brought us the White House wanted something that was the people's house. It was of a certain degree of modesty, and certainly not a palatial, ostentatious kind of thing. And what's remarkable about this is that, you saw all the gold that he's added to the Oval Office, and of course he's paved over the Rose Garden and things like that. He's done other things. Those are things that could be reversed, right? The next president could come along, take that gold out of the Oval Office and restore it to a more of a simple grace that it's meant to be. They could replant the Rose Garden. They're not going to be able to do this. This is a decision for the ages.
It's so large as to be irreversible. Tola, let me ask you a question. David hinted at something. There's a lot of. It is an unusual thing in Washington. It almost feels tribal. Like, wait, you're not allowed to just do that to our most famous buildings. But It's not as if Congress is up in arms right now about this. How do you explain that?
Yeah, when we think about the White House, we think about the founders, we think about the 250 years of this country's history going back to the Declaration of Independence. One of the reasons that the founders, as we wrote about in The Atlantic in the most recent issue, one of the reasons they didn't put all of these things in writing was because there were checks and balances. They thought that they would have a co-equal branch of government with Congress speaking up against these things. Now, Democrats have been able to speak up, but they have limited power. They're out of power. But Republicans who, in the design of this country and the design of our government, Republicans are supposed to be able to speak up against a president of their own power, just as Democrats are supposed to be able to do the same thing. President Trump has broken that system. He said that if you're a Republican, you speak out against me, I'm going to get you out of the party, out of Congress. And that has been a shot across the bow for a number of Republicans who are not speaking out, even when they know that what he's doing, in many cases, is a shock to their own conscience.
So what you're suggesting is that the Bill of Rights should have had an amendment that stated future presidents may not turn the White House into Mar-a-Lago, right? Because no one would have done this until. And by the way, the Mar-a-Lago thing is very. The last time I was in the Oval Office, he actually has filled the Oval Office with leftovers. As I understood it from him, leftovers from Mar-a-Lago, gold fixtures and the like. So it does seem almost psychologically.
Even if they put it in the law, Jeff, I'm sure he would find somebody to argue that, that strict definition of Mar-a-Lago is a geographic entity, so therefore it's actually fine to do this. And, just to the point about the wrecking ball, right? It's metaphor made real.
Manifest,
and that the Republicans, of course, in this term versus the first term, are remarkably quiescent and quiet.
Because they're scared or because they agree with them?
It was actually the first person who ever told me they thought Donald Trump was a human wrecking ball was actually Bob Corker. At the time, he was the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. And this was in early 2017. I found it to be a remarkable statement at the time. It presaged, of course, the falling out that Corker and Trump had, and what's the result? He's no longer in the Senate. And I think that, for me, is a difference between 1.0 and 2.0, is that Donald Trump feels that he can be an actual wrecking ball as well as a, sort of wrecking ball of institutions, and there's no Republicans to speak up.
Corker is one of the many people who got out of Dodge, essentially. We don't really have the Corkers and the Romneys and Flakes, McCain certainly, to say, this is what you're not.